wait. Da-da-da. Stop video. Yeah, you don't need to see me. That's just my face anyway. But it's nice that you could see me for a moment. Anyway,
Yes.
so now I think it works. I hope.
Yes, it's quite
So
interesting.
we're
There's
gonna
a bit
just
of
start.
glitch.
This was,
there is a bit of glitch in the sound.
there will always be a bit of glitch.
Perfect. But now it's
Okay.
much better. Perfect. Yes, so the floor is yours.
Wait. Thank you, and thank you for bearing with me. Internet is such a COVID crime. What you see here is a diary entry from when I was young. It's like 30 years old now. And there I write in my mother language, of course. I finally figured out what I want to become when I grow up. I want to be like a gymnast, or I'd like to go to space and listen to the sound of space. And of course, what happened is my teacher told me this is actually not possible because there are no sounds in space. That was really hard for me, and I kind of gave up on that whole idea until very recently, let's say. But one thing that I did start to do is search for other ways of finding new, configurations of images and sounds. So this is an older work. It's called the vernacular file formats. And within this work, I compress the same source image via different compression languages and then subsequently implement a same or a similar error into the file. And so what you see is the otherwise invisible compression language that gets to kind of the surface of the screen. So I started to see that every compression obviously has its own kind of organization. It has a form of resolution. And so recently, I've kind of been pivoting away from glitch research into what I call resolution studies. And in resolution studies, I formulate a resolution not just as a way to make things function. And we saw this also already in Jasmine's talk just before. I really enjoy the overlap here. Resolutions are also always involving a compromise. So they make something work in one way, but that means that the other ways are kind of cut away from the space of potentiality. So a problem I see for the normal in air quotes, user is that we're often conditioned not to think through these compromises. And so I started to look and see how I could get outside of these compromises. One example is, for instance, through rheology of data. So a rheology of data is kind of this fluidity of data. So you can push different types of data, whether that's sound or something else, to become an image, etc. And that is normally kind of closed off in our computers, but it's a very normal thing to do for scientists. So here you can see me listening to a rainbow. And the question is, why are we not listening to a lot of the objects around us? Like, why do we not sonify them? Because you can receive all kinds of other types of information or perspectives on these objects. And so here I started to see, again, kind of these compromises that are in our standard settings of our tools. And with that type of research, I embarked on what I call shadow knowledge, which is a research into the shadows of what is possible, what is kind of like the liminal spaces of how we render our data. And I proposed that research to CERN, Arts at CERN, the big particle physics research space in Switzerland. And I was invited to do a residency there, the Collide Barcelona International Awards. And this is a really nice opportunity for anyone, but for me, for my research, it was really great because what they do is they give you the opportunity to talk to a lot of scientists. Like every day they set up a meeting from about an hour to really talk and go in depth with the scientists. But what I realized when I came and I had my first talks was that to talk about shadow knowledge was not really possible because it's a metaphor, and scientists, they don't really embark on that type of language. And I had very kind of disinterested reactions towards what are your shadows? What are your biases? Where do you not look? it was really hard to get into a conversation. But what is really nice about the residency that you get at CERN is that there's also a scientific, not a Mitarbeiter, but something along those lines. And so we talked about maybe reformulating the way to speak with the scientists. And so finally, I reformulated one research question, which became a research question into impossible images. But as you can imagine, an image at this point to me is basically a data set. And so it could also just be impossible sounds. I think the formatting is kind of like interchangeable at this time for me. So I'd ask every scientist I spoke with, imagine you could obtain an impossible image of any object or phenomenon that you think is important, with no limits on spatial, temporal, energy, signal to noise, or cost resolutions. What image would you create? So maybe to shorten it up, imagine you could obtain an impossible image. What image would you create? And in this case, imagine you could obtain an impossible sound. What sound would you create? And so I got a lot of answers, and the most beautiful ways. But one that I really like, that I want to immediately show you, is the answer by Harrison Prosper, who told me the story of how he likes his daughter to look at the night sky. He always tries to tell her, look, in a way, what you're seeing is not just light, you're also looking to the ever ongoing reverberations of the Big Bang. And so what I immediately learned there is that I got kind of the listening to the universe back, right? But I also found that I still lacked a lot of language. Like some scientists tried to make their tools easily understandable by calling them a microscope or a telescope or just a giant photographic machine or a scanner. But very often those are like kind of metaphors for what they were really doing. And so like if you're thinking about the Large Hadron Collider, it's not really a camera, it's actually much more complex. So I was looking for types of language to kind of like start to think through what these objects really compromise. How could we kind of find and formulate a tool to look at what all these machines, whether they visualize or sonify, what do they actually compromise through their way of working? And so this is in conversation with a scientist from the University of Barcelona. His name was Xavier Lurie. And here we were talking about the MAGIC telescope, which is a telescope he works with. In the MAGIC telescope, they listen to gamma rays, which he said, like, we call that not gamma rays. If we kind of like abstract that, we call them messengers. Then we put them through they go through a transform, and then we pick them up with our telescope, which is what we call the window. And while we transform that data into however we are trying to show it, we get, for instance, an image or a sound or whatever. But there is this latent space there. And so what I started to get really interested in is like the latent space and how the latent space relates to this kind of formula, which is a formula I created. I mean, it's up for discussion, but I think it's a really, like, I see this formula as a tool to kind of consider and recalibrate and see what is compromised. So the latent image in analog photography, this is kind of an image space that exists when photosensitive materials have been exposed, but this material hasn't gone through the process of development yet. So it's kind of like this space that has been touched by the light, but that is not showing its trace evidence in the form of an image yet. So what I kind of thought as this latent image space, you could consider that kind of like as this blob. And as you go through these transforms, you cut parts that are possible and impossible away. Like by resolving the latent image space, you also cut and compromise parts of what was once possible. And that's how this creature, the blob, came about. It's kind of a 3D space that you can enter via this white axis. I call them axis of compromise. And these are 5 axes in the blob. I kind of try to use this latent image space more as a hypothetical space that kind of involves every imaginable and unimaginable image that could ever be rendered. So the main premise of the impossible blob that you see here is that once you choose a parameter to kind of render the object, this parameter kind of metaphorically cuts and divides it up. And so in the blob that you can enter, here we will enter it. I hope this video plays. Sometimes I'm having some issues with this. Yeah, here we go. So this is like the actual blob. This is the map, how to enter. And then you can look at the angel also. It's not so interesting. You can go into the blob, and then you can see like kind of an exhibition of all my different types of impossible images. So here's one like the shadow of dark matter. So I made this exhibition, and while it was the pandemic time, all the galleries were closed. So this was like kind of the only way to show it. But then when the restrictions in Germany kind of got more loose, Lothringer Dreizehn, which is a gallery space or institute. Oops, I just kind of cut out the sound, sorry. They invited me to kind of make this a real exhibition. And so I had to kind of translate what I'd been researching to a real space. And that kind of was hard because at first I just had like all these impossible images that scientists and also people online had given me. So I decided to kind of make a categorization of impossibilities. So I made 5 categorizations. These are the colors. They are kind of color coded. And what I decided is to cut the space. This is kind of the map into these 5 categories with like these physical cuts. And I just wanted to show 2 of my favorite cuts. This is the low fidelity, the impossibility cut for low fidelities. So sometimes the parameters by which an image is originally created are not supported by the image processing technology that renders it visible. So this can be when, for instance, the encoding system, such as a codec, has become unsupported, or the amount of pixels of the image has become higher than the resolution of the display or the computer that has to process it, that has to show it. So when this happens, the technology or the decoder sometimes interprets the image data. So as a result, there's kind of this weird translation of the data that is influenced and deformed into an image. And so there were 2 works here. One is the work that you see here, which is by UCNV. There's also a work that, if we get the chance, I will show it in a little bit, by Peter Edwards. Another cut of impossibility was the green line, which was a line that was called images based on speculation, disbelief, or imagination. And so here I think we're coming really close again to maybe rotten sounds, because let me first describe what this cut was about. While some images may be presented as evidence with a high acutance or as truthful, in reality, the process through which they may have been produced are inscribed with values. So there is often a bias or even a wrong interpretation to the image. So here you can think about the shadow of a black hole, which was, colored. It was an artist interpretation in a way. Or in this case here, this is the base map of planet Earth. We kind of like consider the base map of planet Earth, like here, as NASA offers it to us, as the real image of the Earth. But this image is, and it's always used for weather reports, etc. But this is an image full of bias. Europe is the center. The continents are kind of like disfigured, like Antarctica, and the upper north is stretched. There are no clouds, and it's noon everywhere. So a lot of the images that we use these days, we believe in their truth, but actually, are they presented as a truth? Well, actually, all the noise that is there in a real setup has been just kind of filtered out. And so we start to kind of get conditioned to think of particular images as they're kind of filtered, free of noise. In this case, that would be clouds, or the bad air that comes out of fabrics or whatever. Another artwork that is very close to that we also installed was Open Weather, and the Open Weather Station, the Impossible Weather Station, which was an installation that got activated once a week. We would go with an antenna to listen to the NOAA satellites. And the NOAA satellites are the US satellites that scan the Earth for the weather. And so what you can do is you can just kind of dial into the frequency at which the NOAA satellites are sending their information, and you can listen to that information, but you can also de-encode it into a map. So you get all these lines, and what you see here, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but on the top end of the reading, you see there is a lot of noise, because the way we see the weather is always full of noise. And that is like, it can again be like, because there is, for instance, emissions and highways, etc. These are images, again, that are filtered to just show particular types of weather. And so even the way we see the weather on a daily basis is a de-noised version of our realities. I will show one more work. This is the one that I wanted to show, but I kept it for later. It's the Nova drone that I already mentioned. So this is an older kind of video synthesizer that is made by Casper Electronics. And what it does, it has like these 3 channels, RGB, and you can change the oscillation of these channels. But that electric current also goes to an LED that has 3 channels. And so it kind of like translates that current. But what happens is when you look at it, and we saw that just a little bit before. Let me go back. When you look at here at the LED, what you see is kind of this fluid oscillation, but that is because our eyes cannot see how fast the oscillation of the LED goes. But then when you use your phone that has a particular chip, it also interprets this oscillation in a particular way. And in this case, through the kind of a rolling shutter effect, you see these like bending translations or interpretations of the oscillation of the LED. That is basically also at the same time the sound. So finally, I want to conclude maybe. This is a piece from a manifesto, which was called the Glitch Studies Manifesto, that I published in 2010, like more than a decade ago. But I actually, when I was preparing this, I thought it was really funny, because throughout building this exhibition and thinking through impossibilities, one of the main perspectives also for the Rotten Sounds Symposium is maybe, to me, that we have become so conditioned to believe in noiseless systems that is why we've become kind of no longer interested, or we kind of became blind to the compromises in our resolutions. So while noise is really an integral part of the data, very often we don't have access to it anymore. It's just totally deleted. Yeah, so thank you for listening, and sorry for the technical mishap.
Yeah, thank you so much, Rosa. The first question, as always, are there any questions from the audience here, maybe? We are happy to forward them, or the micro is already there. No? Okay, so then Martina, maybe you want to...
Yeah, so I'm going to be a bit selfish here, because coming from virtual reality, I saw that you have, you have been working with virtual reality technology, and as you show already in 2020, you had this exhibition in New York City, which is basically a social virtual spaces. And it was really interesting to hear your talk, and kind of made me think how we always saw VR as this kind of, escape from reality, as, something that we can't see in real. And somehow you were mentioning, this noiseless kind of filter we have, or this noise filter we have. So I would be curious if for you, how do you see the position of VR art? Like, can we use VR to actually show something that is very physical, very, very real, but that we can't see in the physical or real? So can we use VR for like kind of show the unseen, or show what is disregarded, or what is lost in compression, for example?
I think absolutely, but I think every translation to another medium or format basically adds, it gives a trace evidence to the material, but it also kind of pivots the material. It changes it, it decomposes it, it restructures it. So there is added information, and then there is always a different scale or scope that can be chosen. So there's many kind of examples we could get into, like you could show things bigger or smaller, but I think the main point is that with every translation, with every like different type of material composition, comes a layer of new information and ways of reading and seeing. Yeah, I made a work in, I think, 2013. It was called Gilitla, after the little city in Mexico, and or artist space. And in Gilitla, I did a lot of kind of performances, because at that time we couldn't show video outside of like the quadrilateral space. Like everything is kind of stuck in four-cornered spaces. And so what I wanted to do is put video textures over all kinds of strange objects. That was like kind of really refreshing for me, I guess, at least. So by putting video in the medium of virtual reality, in this case, you could see videos with different types of corners, with different timelines, and they could, expand this idea of what video is in, for me, a very special way.
Thank you.
You concluded talking about, maybe I can also quote something that you said in an interview. You said, like, everything that was compromised is being lost and forgotten. And every time that we make new technology, we become less and less aware of all the compromises that happened before. And you called this suffering from technological hyperopia, or like farsightedness. Do you, like, for yourself, or maybe on a broader level, have any cure for that, or any solution?
So the cure, I don't know if I have the cure. I think if we go one presentation back to Jasmine, so I thought it was really interesting. She was talking about the MP3. What I'd like to add to that is that the MP3 was tested on Suzanne Vega's I Am Sitting in the Corner only. And so we have a lot of materials, like the JPEG compression was tested only on Lena, the Playboy centerfold, a white lady. So these materials that we use on a daily basis, they are completely inscribed with bias. They're made for white people and particular. So what I tried to create, but I don't know if it works. It's like kind of in a, in a test space. I wanted to try to create this tool to kind of get outside of this hyperopia. And that is this tool, this formula, the messenger that goes through the window. And so by seeing what else, or to really consider where the material transformations are happening, we could see maybe where things could be compromised, or just where like kind of the alterations are happening. So that was that formula. I mean, I think it's a metaphoric tool. I don't think you could actually go to a material and say, hey, look, I have this formula, and now I can see where where my hyperopia is taking place. But yeah, hyperopia happens in every corner of the gods.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, really.
Thank you, Eva, for that question.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm just checking. Yeah, I don't know, Thomas. I don't see. Yeah, Thomas, you wanted to maybe comment something on the sound part. Otherwise, I would thank Rosa so much for being with us and for your time. And hopefully we see physically somewhere soon.
Yes.
So, thank you so much.
Thank you, Rosa.
Yeah.